They said the village didn't sit on the map so much as on a mistake, a wind-scoured pocket of scrub and stone pressed between ridges that kept weather and mercy from arriving on time. A place too far from law to remember its face and too close to hunger to forget its teeth. In that place a man's name traveled faster than horses and lasted longer than rain, and one name had outlived storms, sheriffs, posses, and the patience of God. Calder Pike. He wasn't born feared. He earned it the long way, month by month, mile by mile, doing quiet work in loud times and loud work when quiet would have cost lives. Children knew his silhouette the way they knew the shapes of vultures. Men learned his habits the way they learned the weaknesses of their tools. He rode with his left shoulder a fraction forward, like fate leaned on him. And he carried his iron low, not because fashion said so, but because the draw path was shorter and life respected geometry. Outsiders came to the village with stories they thought were tall, until the locals did not laugh. He put a bullet through a rattler's mouth as it struck. Somebody would say, and the old men would nod because they'd been there and found the snakeskin later, slit clean as pride. He shot the rope on a hanged man while 6 muzzles watched him. Somebody else would add, and the blacksmith's wife would say the hanged man limped for weeks and became a decent neighbor. He turned a flood with a shovel. A boy would brag, and the baker would correct him. No. Calder turned men with words until their shovels made a dam in time to keep the schoolhouse from floating to Kansas. He had killed. He did not pretend otherwise. He just did not celebrate it. He counted his dead like a miser counts coins, every weight heavy in one pocket you do not show anyone. The first time a bounty poster used his name, it was the wrong face and the wrong price. By the last time there was no face, only the warning, do not try this man. The West had a way of appointing its kings without coronations, and Calder wore a crown nobody wanted, authority forged out of necessity, terror built out of the exactness with which he chose to act. There were others, fast hands, hard eyes, reputations flaring bright as prairie fires and dying just as quick. But he lasted. He lasted because he made the desert his accountant and let it audit every choice until the books balanced in his favor. He did not drink before a storm. He did not talk before a fight unless words could buy time cheaper than blood. He did not gamble with debt he couldn't pay. And when he rode into the village at dusk with dust arranged around him like a robe and his horse throwing steam into the cold, people felt the air thin out. Even the dogs reconsidered barking. That evening the wind carried the smell of distance rain that wouldn't arrive, gun oil from somewhere strangers hid, and the sour tang of men who had convinced themselves that dying famous was safer than living unknown. It wasn't the first time such men visited. It would not be the last. But this time the story would not limp away. It would get up, stretch itself long, and look the whole West in the eye. Across the horizon 3 riders appeared like punctuation marks at the end of a sentence the village hadn't finished reading. One was huge in the shoulders and narrow in the head, a gait with no hinge. One sat the saddle like a borrowed chair, hands twitching toward his belt over and over as if each moment needed measuring. The third rode easy, small smile fixed to his face like a scar. The kind of smile that told you he'd studied other men's ends and was ready to compose yours. They did not put on masks because their names had decided masks were for lesser ambitions. The saloon door swallowed them and burped up silence. Calder watched from the hitch rail with a patience that made other men hungry. He fed his horse a strip of dried apple, and the horse took it soft, the way a smart animal takes a gift from a harder animal. No one told Calder anything. No one needed to. A whisper ran along the street like powder on a fuse and reached him without words. They had come for him by going around him. The coward's straight line frightened a town to draw out its spine. Inside, glass clinked like teeth in a cold mouth. The piano bled a note and then remembered its religion and went quiet. A girl laughed once too loud, the laugh of someone who understood the mathematics of danger and was trying to reduce the equation with noise. It didn't work. Calder shifted his weight, the kind of micro-movement that separates men who react from men who decide. The big one spoke first and made the room smaller by a foot. "We're looking for the man whose shadow walks faster than he does." The bartender looked at the shadow under the lamp and said nothing because he liked his job and his blood inside him. The man with the nervous hands spun a glass and licked his lips. "They say he teaches lessons." The smiling one smiled wider. "We came to graduate." They were not the first to speak like that. The graveyard could recite the script. Calder stepped through the door like he was replacing a missing wall, not entering a room, and the saloon did a curious thing. It remembered how to breathe and then decided to wait. He did not announce. He did not name. He set his hat on a peg and walked to the bar and put 2 silver coins down like he was tipping fate. "Water," he told the bartender, "because mercy starts small." The smile twitched. The big one turned to face him, grin rising like a storm that hadn't been told the crops had suffered enough. The nervous one lifted his palm off the glass and found sweat that made the glass look like it had cried. "Calder Pike," the smiling one said, and his voice was a dare, dressed in velvet. Calder drank. The water went down like discipline. He set the cup aside, and the sound it made was the sound a clock makes when it reminds a room that time is impartial. "You men know how to leave?" he asked. He was not being clever. He was giving the last kind of mercy a man can give other men, a door without a sermon. The big one laughed from his lungs, the nervous one from his throat, the smiling one not at all. "We know how to finish," the smile said. "Do you?" There was a weight in the room like weather reconsidering whether to break. The boy sweeping near the far wall discovered the science of being invisible and got good at it. The bartender realized the cash box would mean nothing by sunrise, whether full or empty. Calder let the silence walk around him, study his hands, check his breath for haste. He found none. "There are people here," he said. "You don't have to be interesting in front of them." The big one moved then, quick for his size, the kind of quick that gets men famous for a week and dead for longer. Calder's right hand didn't move at all. His left did. It lifted and stopped the big man at the chest, flat palm, no flourish. Just a reminder that momentum is a sorcerer you should not worship. "Step back," Calder said. It wasn't a threat. It was a measurement. The nervous one's hand finally found his gun and discovered that holding is not drawing, and drawing is not using, and using means paying a price nobody told him would be taxed in shame first. Calder's eyes moved to him, not unkind, just absolute. "Don't," he said. It almost worked. Then the smiling one cut the room in half with the quietest noise, the click of a hammer coming to readiness. Faith left the room to see if it could find better work. "We finish," the smile repeated, and for the first time even the bottles stopped pretending to be strong. The rules of survival out here were older than the men who broke them. Never stand between 2 hungry things. Never mistake a crowd for help. Never negotiate with pride. And if a man shows you his intent, believe him the first time. Calder believed the smiling man and believed him fast. The distance between them was not much 10 paces and a decade of practice, but 10 paces is enough to write entire histories if you've done your homework. Calder checked the mirror behind the bar with the corner of his eye, counted reflections, angles, liabilities. 3 men with purpose, 1 with an appetite, 1 with a nervous system that didn't obey its owner, and 1 with a reputation trying on bravery in the worst possible changing room. He saw the way their feet settled on the planks, who had heels that meant to stay and who had toes that meant to go. He knew, the way farmers know weather by the taste of air, that the first thunder would be the smiling man's. The second, the nervous one's, would be lightning without a plan, and the third would be the big one's. Late and loud, a landslide after the quake, which is to say, the order of death had already been chosen if nobody intervened. Calder intervened with a single sentence aimed not at their ears, but at their bones. "I don't kill for your story." The smiling man cocked his head like a coyote deciding if the rabbit is pretending. "Then die for ours." The hammer finished its arc. The nervous one flinched toward his grip. The big one set his shoulders like a door that had decided to be the wall, too. The bartender fell in love with his own floor and proposed. Calder's hand moved, not to the low iron and not toward the smiling man. He moved left, not forward. And in moving left, he put the nervous man's line of fire through the smiling man's ribs if the nervous one fired wild, which he would because panic has a favorite direction, and it is always stupid. Think, Calder said. And whether he said it to himself or to them didn't matter. The word bit the air. The nervous one froze, perhaps hearing in that syllable all the fathers that had failed him. The smiling one smiled smaller, as if satisfaction had downsized for efficiency. He's clever, he told the big one. The big one grinned like a train without brakes. He's dead, he said, and drew. It started ugly. The big man's shot took a chunk of lamp glass and made a new star in the room. The nervous man's hand convulsed, but he didn't fire because suddenly the map had shifted. The smiling man adjusted, a small correction that meant he had been hunting longer than most men had been lying. Calder's draw looked slow if you didn't know what mattered. It looked like a man deciding which letter to write first, not which word to end. He aimed not at a chest, not at a head. He aimed at the floor between the smiling man's boots and the nervous man's knee and fired once. Wood jumped. Splinters leaped like minnows. The nervous man lost balance, his knee buckled, and his panic fired the shot it had been saving for hell. The smiling man's side took it a slice, not a hole, and pain made him blink, which is the only mercy the world still respects. The big man's second shot came meaner, and would have opened the bartender like a ledger if Calder hadn't stepped through it. An inch of air and a century of practice between survival and arithmetic. Calder's second shot found the big man's wrist, not to end him, only to remove him from the menu. His gun went clattering and tried to pretend it had never known him. The room howled in its throat. Men shouted using words from a religion that hadn't been invented yet. The nervous man grabbed the bar like it could convince him to remember his own name and bit whatever words tried to leave his mouth. The smiling man put a hand to his side and looked at the blood there the way a man looks at a bill, he thought. Someone else would pay. He did not wheeze. He did not cry. He smiled, and this time the smile was honest because it included the fear. Pike, he said softly, like maybe the name tasted different up close. You could have ended me. Calder kept his pistol down, not out of kindness but out of policy. No shot you don't need to take ever turns into a blessing later. You walked into my town, he said. You made it smaller. I'm just restoring weight. The big man groaned on the floor, his wrist screaming the confession his mouth wouldn't. The nervous one whispered the word sorry to nobody in particular and meant it, which is the saddest sort of prayer. The smiling man took his hand away from his side and looked at the dark wetness like a card he couldn't put back in the deck. Men will come, he said. They always do, Calder answered, and the room understood that conversation like a jury understands instructions it doesn't plan to follow. The door pushed open, and a boy with a basket of laundry stepped in and stepped back out in the same breath, an owl pretending to be a sparrow. The bartender found a towel he didn't love and offered it. The smiling man took it with gratitude that tried to pass for contempt and failed. What's your end, Pike? He asked. Every story has one. Calder's eyes moved to the window, and beyond it to the street, and beyond that to the graveyard, and beyond that to the hills, where endings go to practice becoming beginnings. Same as yours, he said. Only later. The smiling man laughed, then coughed red into his palm. Later isn't a promise, he said. It's a bet. Calder nodded. I count cards. The big man rolled, cradling his wrist like a lover, and the nervous man finally found his knees and the courage to keep them. He left his gun where it lay like a lie that had been caught. We should go, the nervous one said. The smiling man looked at Calder, and for a fraction of a second respect passed between them like a coin nobody would tax. We will, he said. He put pressure on the towel and began to move slow, careful toward the door. The big man followed with all the dignity a large injured animal can assemble. The nervous man went last, backwards, as if he trusted a man more when the man had given him a reason to fear him. At the threshold, the smiling man paused. "They say you're the most feared in the West," he said. "Maybe," Calder replied. "Or maybe I'm just the one who learned to be useful longer." "There's a difference?" "Ask the men who lived." The smiling man left the room like a verdict leaving a courtroom, not satisfied, only recorded. When the door swung shut, the saloon completed the exhale it had been holding. Somebody dropped a glass and nobody scolded him for it. The piano tried a chord and remembered it had to be tuned. The bartender faced Calder. "You going to chase them?" "No," Calder said. "The West will." He turned, collected his hat, and stepped into the light as if stepping into his office. Outside, the village resumed pretending it was normal. It failed, but at least it worked at the failure with conviction. On the far ridge, 3 silhouettes made new plans. In the graveyard, the wind rehearsed names. Somewhere not yet visible, riders who had never learned what mercy costs counted their cartridges and told one another they were ready to be famous. Calder Pike fed his horse another strip of apple and listened to the dust. It had begun to whisper a rumor he did not like, that the story would not end in a bar, or in a street, or with a clever man bleeding into a towel. It would end where fear goes when it has decided it is tired of walking at home, in the village in front of the people who needed him to be a door again. Night slapped the valley with cold, and the village lit its lamps like tiny arguments against a larger truth. Calder walked the boardwalk, checking the seams of the place the way a saddler checks stitching before a hard ride. He spoke little. He looked much. The schoolhouse shutter banged once and stopped after a hand fixed it. Horses in the livery muttered in their sleep like soldiers dreaming bad orders. The barber's pole leaned 5 degrees south of Honest. He straightened it because a man who lets small angles go won't see the big ones coming. Above the stable, the sky broke open enough to show a stripe of stars, and the stars looked down without deciding anything. At the edge of town, where the boards turned back into dirt, he found Jonah Hawley waiting, a man built out of rope and regret who commanded respect not by volume, but by inventory. The scars on his hands told you he had held things that bit back and kept holding. "Saw 3 ride out," Jonah said. "Saw 6 more ride in behind the ridge. Strangers with hardtack and harder eyes. Paid or angry?" "Paid," Jonah said. "Angry later." "They'll try to be clever," Calder said. "They'll fail at it. You aim to help them?" Jonah asked. Calder looked past him into the dark where the road braided with all the others and decided that fatigue is a luxury and you pay for it with other people's blood. "I aim to make tomorrow possible," he said. Jonah nodded like that sermon had found a congregation. "You're going to get shot. Not tonight. How do you know?" "My horse doesn't have the look." Jonah grunted the kind of laughter men reserve for jokes they wish were lies. "You ever get tired?" "Every day," Calder said. "And every day ends anyway." He left Jonah at the edge and walked back into the middle because the middle is where history sits down when it wants to test a town. He stopped at the well and listened. It told him nothing about water but much about echoes. He could hear the shape of the street through the hole, the way sound bounced off walls, the way wind cheated corners, the way footsteps planned their futures. He waited until one set of steps made the wrong kind of promise. The man came up the alley like a letter you don't want to read. He kept a shadow not because he loved it, but because he didn't know how to move without it. Calder did not draw. He did not call out. He let the man get close enough to smell the particular sweat that fear and arrogance produce when they work together. Then Calder spoke very softly to the air. "You're in a town that knows me." The man froze. It is unnerving to be recognized by a voice that doesn't need your name. "You can leave," Calder said, "and keep all your blood and most of your dignity. Or you can try to make your employer proud right now, in which case you will be remembered by people who cannot spell you." The man made the wise choice and ran. Calder did not watch him go because mercy happens behind you and does not need supervision. He crossed the street and found the blacksmith standing in his doorway with a hammer he didn't want to use on anything but iron. "It's starting?" the blacksmith asked. "It's continuing," Calder said. "And I need you to keep the boys inside?" "They'll want to see." "Then give them something better to see," Calder said. "Have them stack grain." "Men who are busy don't volunteer to be heroes." The blacksmith nodded, anvil heavy. "And the women?" "Tell them to set water by the doors." The blacksmith didn't ask why. He'd lived long enough to know that after men who plan poorly arrive, water always becomes necessary. Calder moved again past the church that had been built with straight boards and crooked theology, past the bakery where flour sat in a quiet drift on the windowsill like snow too shy to fall, past the undertaker's place where pine waited to become apology. He made a circle because circles are what you draw when you're trying to convince fate that you understand geometry. Then he returned to the saloon because he wasn't done with the smiling man, not tonight, not until he had found the source paying for those smiles. He took a table in the corner that allowed him to see both doors and the mirror. He faced the room with a patience that only men who have already paid for tomorrow can afford. The owner poured him coffee thick enough to hammer nails with. "You going to let them bring the fight here?" she asked. "No," he said. "I'm going to make them bring it somewhere they can't aim well." "Where's that?" "Anywhere with witnesses." She snorted. "They don't fear witnesses." "They do if they want to get paid," Calder said. "Men with money want their hired lunatics to be precise." As if called by that sentence, 3 men entered who labored under the misconception that standing wide meant owning space. They ordered loud to colonize the air and found it smaller than expected. Calder watched their hands, not their faces. Faces lie in civilized dialects. Hands speak the local language. He learned what he needed. One wore his gun like a costume, one like a mistress, one like a debt. The last worried him. Men who carry iron like a debt want to pay it off with your future. "We heard there's a legend here," the mistress said. "We're hunting legends," the costume explained. The debt didn't talk. He didn't need to. He had the eyes of a man who believed the world had borrowed too much from him. He planned to collect. Calder raised his cup and the steam drew a ghost between him and them. "Legends are poor protein," he said. "You'll starve chewing them." Mistress laughed. Costume Echo laughed. Det stared. "We'll take ours raw," the Det finally said, voice like gravel caressing her coffin lid. Calder sighed into his coffee like a man disappointed in someone else's arithmetic. "I offered one set of boys a door tonight," he said. "I can offer another." Mistress looked at Costume, who looked at Det, who did not look anywhere but at Calder's hands. "We decline," Det said. "We accept your invitation to end." Calder put the cup down very gently, the way you set small creatures back into the wild. "Then here are the terms," he said. "We go to the edge of town so that if any of us die, the undertaker won't be too tired. We draw only when the clock reaches the mark I choose. We fire only the number of shots I allow. If any of you do anything else, the village will do the rest." "The village?" Mistress scoffed. "You mean these cobblers and widows?" Calder smiled for the first time that day, and it was not friendly. "I mean the ground," he said. "It has a memory." The Det considered the ground, which did not blink. "When's your mark?" he asked. Calder looked at the clock. It was 6 minutes to the hour. "When the big hand kisses 12. How many shots?" "1, each?" Calder shrugged as if discussing weather. "In total." Their faces rearranged themselves, trying to fit that rule into their idea of victory. Mistress had a flash of imagination and lost it. Costume found a tremor and hid it in his hatband. Det smiled, and it looked nothing like the other man's earlier smile. It looked like a stone rolling downhill and enjoying it. "Agreed," Det said. They moved as a group to the street. People peered from curtains, not because they loved violence, but because humans stare at floods to learn how to build boats later. The clock began to climb toward its deadline. Mistress shifted, then regretted shifting. Costume whispered something to his god and got silence. Det let the air fill his lungs until it had nowhere else to go, and then let it out as if emptiness were part of his plan. Calder stood as if he had been carved, and the sculptor had put more time into his patience than his expression. The hand climbed. The town listened. The wind intended nothing. The ground prepared to remember. When the hand touched 12, the world hesitated, a breath held by a throat too big to belong to anything that bleeds. One shot, Calder had said, and in that sparse arithmetic men discovered how much they had been wasting. Mistress had already lost. It showed in the forward tilt of his desire. Costume lost next. His lips moved into a last-minute bargain with fate that never pays retail. Det did not lose yet. Calder saw that and adjusted the future accordingly. He did not move first. He allowed the cost of movement to present itself. Mistress flinched. The flinch became a draw. The draw became an error. Error became motion. Motion became noise. Calder didn't fire. The rule still lived, and he had not earned it yet. Costume broke next, fumbling toward iron as if a weapon were a staircase to heaven, and he had forgotten how to climb. Det waited, eyes on Calder's shoulders, not his hands, the mark of a man who had learned that hands lie but shoulders announce. When Calder moved, it was not dramatic. It was a fraction subtracted from chaos. He stepped in 3 inches toward Det, stealing angle, giving nothing back, and the act changed distances for all 3 men so completely that only one of them noticed. Det noticed. He began his draw, not fast. Correct. Mistress fired wild because panic needed to prove it existed. The bullet chewed a corner off the Undertaker's sign, which would mean something later when wood was measured for a box. Calder's gun came up on a line not quite straight, because straight lines belong to geometry and gunfights belong to physics. It met Det's rising arc and touched it with a single piece of lead that removes argument. The bullet did not kill Det. It killed his wrist's idea of cooperation. The gun tumbled. The ground caught it and kept it. Mistress, seeing an opening where there was a closing, moved to fire again. The rule said no, and the rule had been paid for with discipline, and so the village by which he meant the ground refused. Calder pivoted, not to shoot, to step into Mistress's space and steal courage from his lungs with proximity. Sometimes you disarm a man by reminding him he has a face. Mistress saw his own simple future reflected in Calder's eyes, nothing cinematic, just a room with no exits, and he let his gun decide it would prefer darkness inside a holster. Costume, poor soul, had given up on gods and looked to math. He was still counting when Jonah Hale's hand settled on his shoulder and explained, with necessary kindness, that living long is an option. One shot used the rule enforced by silence. Det sank to his knees and examined his right hand like it had betrayed him for love. Perhaps it had. Mistress stared at the clock as if time had joined the enemy. Costume stared at the ground as if inventing a religion without miracles. Calder holstered as if concluding a letter. "Take your friend to the sawbones," he told them. "Leave before the ground remembers your names. It's particular about who it keeps." Det laughed once, a sound with bone in it. "You could have ended me," he said, echoing the earlier man. "I did," Calder replied. "Not the way you mean." They left, a procession of diminished ambition, and the town sighed in boards and hinges and lungs. The Undertaker measured his sign and called it Providence that it needed repair anyway. The bartender brought a pitcher to the doors and left it there. Women unfolded from behind curtains, folded their aprons, unfolded again. Boys pretended they had not watched. Men pretended they had always known the ending. Night sagged with relief and then tightened again, because stories like this do not run out of chapters just because you prefer shorter books. Calder walked to the edge of town where the road resumes its argument with the horizon and found the smiling man waiting, shirt stained, towel now dry and useless, eyes glassy with pain and arithmetic. He sat a horse like a man who didn't trust that the ground would hold him. "You were supposed to be dead by now," he said conversationally. So were you, Calder said. The smiling man grinned as if the point had been conceded. They'll keep coming, he added. They always do. I always leave a door, Calder said. That's why they stop. You think fear earns you peace? No, Calder said. Usefulness does. The smiling man winced at a movement he hadn't meant to try. Tell me, he asked, and there was no sarcasm left, only a craftsman's curiosity. What are you when you don't have to be this? Calder looked back at the village lamps soft, people moving the way people move when the night does not aim at their throats, and answered without poetry. Tired. The smiling man nodded, as if that were a title he recognized. There's a price on you, he said. I know, higher than last winter. Inflation, Calder said, and it almost passed for humor. I can call it off, the smiling man offered. Your reach is that long? My employer's is who? The smiling man hesitated. Paying makes honest men of liars quicker than church does, but some loyalties run deeper than nerves. Doesn't matter, he said. What matters is there's an end written for you. Might as well choose the punctuation. I prefer commas, Calder said. The smiling man laughed, then coughed, then grimaced. You will die, he said, not as a threat, as a law. Of course, Calder said. The question is whether the town lives first. The smiling man pulled his reins, turned, then turned back. If it comes at noon, it won't be like tonight, he warned. It'll be a parade. Men who think reputation is a currency you can print forever. Drums, flags, bad speeches. I'll bring earplugs, Calder said. And the smiling man shook his head and rode into the dark like a funeral that got lost. Dawn found the village alive with the industry of people who had learned to respect the fraction between disaster and survival. Women refilled buckets. Men repaired the undertaker's sign and called it insurance. Jonah Halley penned a note he hoped he'd never need, a list of who would lead if Calder didn't stand in his place. Calder ate bread and coffee on the steps of the store and watched the sun decide whether to be generous. Around mid-morning, dust rose on the east road in a sheet, not a plume. Jonah said one word. Parade. Calder stood, rolled his shoulders, checked his holster. The ground waited, hungry and patient, the way all good witnesses are. He walked to the center of the street and stopped. The dust became horses, became hats, became faces, some eager, some paid, some confused by the volume of their own ambition. At the front rode a man who loved his own reflection so much he could have used it as armor. He wore medals the way a lie wears statistics. He opened his arms to the village like a preacher, greeting sinners who held all the tithes. People of nowhere, he announced, we have come to remove a menace and replace it with order. Order looked like 50 men who had never been told no by anybody they respected. Calder let him finish the speech because interrupting a man mid-delusion leaves a stain that's hard to sweep. When the orator paused for air, Calder answered with the only sermon the West had kept sacred, clarity. You'll leave, he said, or you'll leave lighter. Laughter, then ridicule, then the mechanical click of men rehearsing a draw inside their heads. The orator sneered. You cannot kill all of us. Calder nodded. Correct, he said. I can only make dying so expensive your investors withdraw. For the first time, some of the riders looked at one another instead of at him. Money is braver than men until it isn't. Who are you to set yourself above the law? The orator demanded. Nobody, Calder said. I'm the hinge. The door swings on me until we get a better carpentry. The orator raised his hand. It hung there, a decree waiting to be believed. It did not descend. He had heard something most men miss when they plan violence, the quiet hoofbeats behind him, the change in angle of faces down his own line, the way dust holds sound and brings it to smart ears like gossip. He turned. The smiling man approached from the rear with 30 hard-piece riders of his own, none wearing flags, all wearing intent. He rode up alongside the orator and did not smile. Change of contract, he said. Employer prefers their cattle unslaughtered. The orator fumed. Who dares? The one who pays you, the smiling man said. And the sentence ended that conversation everywhere a coin has ever been stamped. He turned to Calder. Pain had given him a new voice. "I can't stop them all," he said, "but I can move half." Calder tipped his hat. "Move them." The smiling man raised his left hand, made a circle in the air, and a third of his riders peeled right like a river, finding a smarter path. Another third followed at a slower pace. The remainder stayed because they were married to a bad idea and ashamed to admit it. The orator found himself with a choir and no congregation. "Kill him," he screamed, and nobody wanted to be the punctuation in that sentence. Calder drew the only line that mattered, one step forward, body squared, eyes level, and for a moment the west. Decided to show the world what fear looks like when it wonders if it has chosen the wrong job. It looks like men looking at their own hands and discovering that shaking is a vote. And the one called Calderpike, most feared until his death, stood in the sun and made the day decide whether it was going to earn its blood or not. That noon, the choice was postponed. But the West does not forget, and later years later, on another dusk-bright noon, when no one expected the hour itself to turn, Traitor Death came to collect, not as a crowd, not as a parade, but as the smallest curve of a young killer's trigger finger and a bright thing in the air that chose a new map through a tired heart. He fell like a door comes off its hinge quietly if the carpenter was good. The village did not scream. It stood, bowed, and learned how to swing without him. And that, in the end, was the lesson he had been teaching the whole time. Fear is just a borrowed crown. Usefulness is the throne.